Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the CGSP Roundtable. I'm Eric Olander in Ho Chi Minh City, and today I'm joined by my good friend and our Middle East editor, Jony Essa in Jerusalem. Jony, I'd like to say I hope you're doing well, but I know that that's a loaded question for anybody who's living in Israel today. But nonetheless, I do hope you're doing well.
Eric, thank you for having me on the show.
And
Thanks again.
yeah, it's great to have you on the show. And we're going to be talking a lot about Israel today and China and the Middle East. Specifically, we're going to talk about a really interesting sequence of events that began last week at the International Court of Justice and has continued through this week, and also to talk about what's going on in the Red Sea. Now, we were supposed to do our show yesterday. And as you may notice through the course of our discussion today, my eyes are a little bit watery. I've got some tissues here. So I've come down with a bizarre head cold because out here in Saigon, it's really hot. It's 34 degrees. It's not like a cold, chilly winter, but somehow I got a head cold. So we couldn't actually do our show yesterday because my eyes were watering, my nose was runny, and I just wasn't in good shape. And it's just as well actually that we waited another day because we got some more news about our top story today. So let me just walk you through, Jony, a kind of the sequence of events, and then I want you to give me your reaction to what's happened so you can help explain a little bit from what you're seeing on the ground in both in Jerusalem, Israel, and the Mideast more broadly as to what's going on. So let me just kind of bring up first, I think we have to start with the comments of the Director General of it's the Director General in the Department of Treaties and Law in the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His name is Xinmin, and he's a very senior Chinese diplomat. He's been around for a very long time. He testified before the International Court of Justice last Thursday and gave a 20-minute speech that was, in many ways, I thought, very provocative. Jony, before we get to his remarks, give us your first reaction to the comments by Ma last week and what you thought.
So Ma's comments basically gave legitimacy to the armed struggle of the Palestinians. So he said that the armed struggle of Hamas basically has legitimacy as a tool of self-determination. So this basically is a very provocative statement, but we were surprised to see that the Israeli side were very quiet in regard to this statement. So not a lot of news, not a lot of buzz was made in reaction to this statement. Today in the morning or yesterday night, a spokesperson from the foreign ministry.
Don't get there quite yet. Hold on, I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
Don't. I don't want you to go all the way down the line. Just give me that reaction, that first reaction. And you mentioned that there was very little response, right?
Very little response.
Okay.
In the last couple of months, we have seen the relationships between China and Israel going very frosty in comparison to last year.
Yeah.
So there was a buzz and expectation that everything was going to go into a more warmer relationship, into a more, let's say, a prosperous relationship where China can react as not only as a mediator. China can move forward from its let's say default economic relationship with Israel into a more prosperous, more engaging growth.
Right.
But after October 7, things have changed drastically, and we have seen, let's say, a stall. We have seen a certain chill in the relationship between the Israelis and the Chinese. We'll speak about that in a moment as well.
Sure. Okay, well, let's get to Ma's comments now and see what he has to say. This is a short extract of what was a 20-minute address where he went through very meticulously what he cited was certain parts of international law, the Arab League Charter, the UN Charter. But let's take a listen now to what he had to say.
Resolution 3070 of 1973, I quote, reaffirms the legitimacy of the people's struggle for liberation from colonial and foreign domination and alien subjugation by all available means, including armed struggle, end of quote. This recognition is also reflected in international conventions. For example, the Arab Convention for Suppressing of Terrorism of 1998 affirms, I quote, the right of peoples to combat foreign occupation, aggression by whatever means, including armed struggle.
So he then goes on to make the point that this is really an extension of the colonial struggles of the past, and that really fired up a few people, not too many. Jony, as you pointed out, the reaction was quite muted. One of the leading China-Israel scholars, Tuvia Gehring, he responded, China now openly advocates for Hamas terrorists at the ICJ, justifying rape, massacre, beheading babies, kidnapping hundreds of hostages, and launching thousands of rockets indiscriminately at civilians as lawful, quote unquote, armed struggle. There, you heard that quote in what Ma was saying. This disgraceful display won't go unanswered. Now, when that came out, I was expecting, given the volatility of this issue, I was expecting more response like this, a very passionate response. I mean, here's a P5 Security Council member, legitimizing armed struggle in what is by far the most sensitive political topic of our time. And Jony, did you, again, with Tuvia's comments in many respects, I think makes sense from someone who's living in Israel, who's a partisan on the Israeli side. Why was it that there weren't more comments like Tuvia's that showed up both in the press and on social media? Why do you think that was?
One of the main reasons I think that this story hasn't gotten more, let's say, buzz on the Israeli formal side, not from pundits or not from scholars or not from analysts, is that in the last couple of weeks, the Middle East, we have seen two emerging stories. We have seen the ongoing story of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and trying to reach, let's say, a conclusion or resolution to that matter. And we have seen another story, which is the Red Sea crisis. The shipping crisis in the Red Sea, and the way China has gone with the interaction. So, in my humble opinion, I actually think that if the Red Sea crisis has not been in place, we may have seen a more, let's say, aggressive response from the Israeli side. But the economic situation now.
Why? What's the connection between the Red? I mean, I know there's a connection between the Red Sea crisis and the war, but what is it? Why would the Israelis be more likely to have responded had the Red Sea crisis not been there?
So the Israelis, in my opinion, now are trying. They're under a lot of scrutiny in the international order, and they are trying to let's say, keep some sort of peace and not aggravate other individuals. So, in my opinion, they try to keep this no good will come for them of going against, let's say, the Chinese right now. In my opinion. So
Okay.
what I think, they just let it go over, and they have no they have to keep on the same side, safe side with the relationship with the Chinese, because if they risk, let's say, the economic situation with their relations with China, I think they will be more doomed than they already are.
Okay. Let's continue with some of the reaction that we saw. So then, again, the Jerusalem Post, which has been normally quite active in covering China-Israel issues, was very muted on this story. And then a couple days later, after Ma's remarks, they ran a story that Hamas praises China for its support at the ICJ. This is actually going to be very, very important in our last point that we're going to make today. Let me quote you what Hamas's one of the senior officials said on this. He said, "We also appreciate the position expressed by the People's Republic of China and its emphasis on the legality of the occupied people's pursuit of self-determination by various means, including armed resistance and the necessity not to confuse terrorism with the armed struggle practiced by the Palestinian people against the Zionist occupation." That was by Osama Hamdan. Osama Hamdan was at one point, if I recall, the head of Hamas in Lebanon. Now I think he's just slated as a senior spokesperson for Hamas, but he is a senior official for the terrorist group and for the group. That's going to be a very relevant piece of information come, again, towards the end of our discussion. But let me also bring you to the Iranian reaction here. So the Iranians, they too responded to this. They basically said that there is an inalienable right to respond. And this is important because Iran backs Hamas. So here we have Hamas and the state-backed Tehran Times both giving a favorable review of Ma's comments here, okay? Let's keep going down our list. Now we're going to get to what you were talking about today. So here is the response that came actually on Monday from Lior Hayat, who is the chief spokesperson for the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Again, and I'm really curious to get your response to this. As statements go, this was not as passionate as I would have expected, given the circumstances. Regret the unfortunate statement made by the legal advisor of China's foreign ministry at the ICJ, according to which armed struggle is part of the Palestinians' right to self-determination and is a legitimate tool for achieving independence. Again, you know, Jony, I'm just surprised that, regret, unfortunate. And so then here's the point about Hamas that I wanted to get your point on. At the present time, the Chinese statement could be interpreted as support for the murderous terrorist attack committed by Hamas on October 7th. And then Lior goes on to say, China should ask itself why the Hamas terrorist organization was so quick to praise the words of the Chinese legal advisor at the ICJ. So there's the link between the Hamas reaction, the Israeli statement, and there we have it. So what was your reaction to this statement? What did you think?
So this statement, or let's say the hierarchy or the relationship between these three, let's say, components, isn't new. We have seen this going again and again and again throughout the 3 or 4 months, throughout the, let's say, the 5 months from October 7th. So China kept silent for a while. It didn't take sides, or if it tried to take sides, it tried to always, let's say, keep a neutral stance of showing that it's supporting more towards the global south and more toward the Arab side. And it hasn't changed its stance on what it saw as, let's say, its ongoing reiteration of the solution of the Palestinian conflict. So this isn't new, and we see the Israeli side trying not to say exactly that China is with us or against us. Like we saw the language, that doubt. We assume, we hope that it doesn't support, but in the end, we see that China is leaning more towards the, let's say, the Arab side in this stance.
Jony, I think you're hedging a little bit here. It's not leaning more towards; it's leaning entirely. There is no. There's no gray area in terms of China's position on this, on the war, on the Palestinians, even to some extent on Hamas here. They have never called Hamas a terrorist organization. They have never acknowledged that the acts of October 7th were an act of terrorism. They have never acknowledged the Israeli position on this side. It seems to me pretty binary that they are 100% aligned with the Palestinian cause here, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. And I think that Ma's statement really could not have been more unambiguous about where China stands on this. What I'm interested in is the fact that Israel, I think, is recognizing that a future post-war could be a very lonely future for Israel, and that there may be a considerable diplomatic isolation. There may be quite a bit of commercial isolation that comes out of this, and that China, as its second largest trading partner, I think it's the second largest trading partner behind the United States, remains a very important economic lifeline, which might also explain why Israel's ambassador to China is making the rounds in places like Shanghai, still trying to drum up investment, still trying to drum up business to keep that economic relationship alive. And they have to bite their tongues, as Lior Hayat seemed to have done, on the politics, because they need the economics to resume after the war is over. What's your reaction to that theory that I have?
I'll give my reaction from a domestic point of view. So the cost of living from the war till today has gone up drastically. Like it's more expensive to live in Israel, and we can actually, we can actually feel the isolation. I'll give you one small example. If you want to order something from the United States, or you want to order, for example, from Europe, from an online site, some sites won't allow you. You will go to you will, let's say, end the transaction, and then the bank will say that the transaction has not gotten through because of the company did not allow the money to transfer from Israel to abroad. So this is one small example of, let's say, this is a commercial example. So companies, let's say, don't want to deal with Israel right now for various reasons. And countries, let's say, are taking a very, let's say, cautious approach on how to deal with Israel. And Israel knows that. It knows that it has isolated itself from the international community in the way it has handled the war on Gaza.
Right.
And the let's say, the post-war, like, who's going to come in and fix Gaza? So we assume that China is going to be involved in one way or another. So why would we try to alienate a major economic power that is our second largest trading partner? So,
well, I guess that's an interesting question. So is there no limit to what the Chinese can do in support of the Palestinian cause, either rhetorically or otherwise, that will provoke a strong Israeli political backlash? Or is China's economic leverage over Israel so extreme, in the sense that Israel needs Chinese imports, Israel needs that Chinese economic connection, because, as you pointed out, inflation is going up, economic isolation is a real concern. And so in that respect, China has a carte blanche in terms of what it can say and do with respect to the war.
I don't know if it has a clean slate or not, but we see that the economic factor is playing a major role. And we've seen this again and again and again with the Israeli ambassador to China, with Edith Ben Abba,
That's correct.
If I'm not mistaken. We've seen her statements going on and on again, that we hope that China would have been more outspoken with their support to the Israeli side, but our relations are going to continue. Our economic relations are not going to falter. We see this again and again and again, and I think we're going to see this going again and again and again. This is not going to change. The economic factor is such an important aspect for the Israeli side. Like, you go to the companies, you go to the commercial companies, and you see everything is made in China, everything is imported from China. Even the cars, for the first time in 15 years, the Chinese EV market is bypassing the Japanese, the German, and the American cars in Israel. So China is such an important economic partner to Israel, and this will stay. I don't think this is going everywhere, and this is a major factor in the way our government is handling the situation. They don't want to aggravate China too much.
Sure. It's also going to be interesting to see in the post-war era, God willing that happens sooner than later, that the Chinese probably will play quite a significant role in the rebuilding of Gaza as well. And so this is a region that's been completely flattened, that needs new infrastructure. There's very few players that can come in at the scale and speed that the Chinese can come in at to rebuild. So one has to expect that China will play a rather prominent role in the rebuilding process, and particularly because of this ideological support of the Palestinian cause, I can see the Palestinians inviting the Chinese in quite eagerly to do this work and to get them back up to speed. So that's something. Let's go back to some of the screens. And we talked about earlier that this question of the Red Sea. And I want to bring up something that I have been absolutely puzzled by. I mean, just puzzled by. Okay, so there was a meeting back in September 17th. So that was 2 weeks ago, that the UK Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, former prime minister, he met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines at the Munich Security Conference. And once again, we have a Western diplomat and a senior Western stakeholder appealing to the Chinese to pressure Iran to rein in the Houthi militants who are attacking shipping in the Red Sea. This is not the first time this has happened. So take a look. This is also Jake Sullivan did the same thing when he met with Wang Yi in Thailand. That was high on the agenda. The issue was also on the agenda when Biden met. When Senate Minority Leader Schumer met with Xi Jinping right after the October 7th attacks. In fact, this was one of the first interactions between the Chinese and the Americans on this issue. Schumer was there. In fact, this was quite a remarkable moment that they were in, because at the moment that they let the press gaggle in with live cameras, Schumer confronted Xi and said, "Will you help us pressure Iran on this?" Xi looked visibly pissed off, very angry. He does not like these kinds of scripted or these unscripted moments. And he just said something to get out of the situation. And then we also saw this this was a topic of discussion when Biden and Xi got together, that could the Chinese pressure Iran, not over the Houthis, but over Hamas. But we've seen this over and over again. And the part that I just am perplexed by, I can't say I'm pulling my hair out, Jony, because I don't have any hair left. But if I had hair like yours, I would be pulling it out, going, why is it that they keep going back to the Chinese, who have shown no inclination or no ability to pressure the Iranians? Now, the Chinese did at one point go to speak to the Iranians, but apparently the takeaway from that was they said that they wanted to protect their own ships, was the conversation. Not necessarily about stop attacking other ships. And it doesn't look like that any progress was made on that, because as we know from today, attacks on international shipping, not just Western, by the way, because Indian ships have come under attack and non-Western ships, Chinese and Russian vessels have been given a pass. Okay, so Chinese and Russian vessels have so far not been attacked as far as I know, and the Houthis have given them a pass. So now there's two schools of thought here, Jony, that I'd like to get your take on. School of thought number one, and we've heard this over and over again from China-Iran scholars like William Figueroa at the University of Groningen in Holland, and numbers of others who've said, listen, you are overestimating, not you, but others, the Americans and the British, are vastly overestimating the level of Chinese influence in Iran, number one. Number two, the Iranians do not take security advice or counsel from the Chinese. This is a country that has been under sanction for, 25, 30 years. They are not afraid of being isolated or sanctioned. When it comes to security decisions, they're going to tell the Chinese to buzz off, because they will look to the Chinese for economic engagement, but they will not look to them for any counsel on security matters related to Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, any of the groups that they're funding. That's off limits. there is another theory, and this is the one I really want to get your take on. And this other theory, Jony, is that the UK and the United States know full well that the Chinese do not have the leverage to pressure Iran. They know full well. This is a theory that was put to me by a leading scholar in the Gulf. And what they're doing is exposing the Chinese weakness diplomatically in the region, that they don't have the pull. Because there's been a lot of talk recently in the past 6 months that China is the rising power in the Middle East, that China is going to displace the United States as the United States retreats. And so part of it is to call the Chinese out and to expose them for what they are, according to the Americans and the British, which are basically all talk and no walk when it comes to their influence. Okay, that is the situation with the Houthis and Hamas and Chinese influence over Iran. You are sitting there in the region. You get to speak to a lot of people in the Arab world and also in Israel. What do you say? What's your reaction?
Yeah, so let's start with the second assumption you've mentioned. And the problem with the second assumption, in my eyes, in my opinion, that it doesn't take into account, let's say, the strategic test. Even if we assume that the Americans want to show that the Chinese cannot and don't have that enough clout, and they want to expose them, but it doesn't take into account the ongoing strategic, let's say, calculations that maybe China doesn't look at the same way strategically, doesn't look or doesn't. It's two different routes. Like the Chinese are playing chess, and the United States are playing checkers. So maybe China doesn't want or doesn't need to even strategically get involved. It doesn't see getting involved in these, let's say, muddled areas. And we've heard this again and again and again. It isn't the strategic goal of the Chinese. It doesn't see itself as let's say the savior that's going into the region and that's going to solve everybody's problem or agenda. That's in my eyes. So
Okay,
even like,
let me just challenge you on that one, because some other people, including the UK Foreign Secretary, are saying it is in China's interest because the Chinese traffic a lot of their trade through the Red Sea between Asia and Europe. In fact, the automotive business that you talked about, a lot of those cars that are showing up in Israel in showrooms do pass through the Red Sea. And so the disruption to maritime traffic in the Red Sea, whether it's the cost of containers, the reduction in shipping, the higher insurance costs, is impacting the Chinese as well, particularly at a time of real economic distress for the Chinese, when the Chinese economy is in many ways showing real signs of weakness. So there is a strategic interest from the Chinese economically to ensure that stability resumes in the Red Sea. Just a theory.
Yeah.
That's the logic of the Westerners who are trying to persuade the Chinese.
So the Westerners are trying to persuade the Chinese and showing that they don't like they're all talk and no actions. But
well, that's another way of thinking of it. I don't think they're that smart to do that, to be honest with you.
Yes,
I don't think that the Americans and the British really are that savvy.
Even in my opinion, I lean towards the first assumption more, that they maybe don't have enough clout or they don't have enough, let's say, interest in getting involved. But in my opinion, if we see the second assumption right now, we should look at it more in let's say more at an ideological level, and we've seen this in the past. So if the Americans say something, the Chinese, like, ideologically are going to be opposed to it. And in my opinion, this is one of the things we're seeing right now, and the economic situation hasn't gotten that bad for China to interfere, let's say.
Yep.
Or we have to see what's going to go on, what's going to be the tipping point for China to say, that's it, we have to find a way to contain the situation. I don't think we're there yet.
Yep.
And I think
No, I
maybe
agree.
and I think maybe this will be actually, and this connects to another question. Why haven't other Arab countries joined the UK and American coalition against the Houthis? The Arab states and other Middle Eastern states, including, let's say, Iran, Turkey, UAE, Saudi Arabia, maybe have some interest in trying to find another, let's say, shipping alternative, or trying to find another, let's say, shipping word order. And they can do this with the Chinese and try to contain this situation. Right now, um, the most ships that are being damaged are American, let's say Canadian, British, but other ships are not being damaged that much.
And I think that there's another part of this too, which is the reputational damage that the United States is suffering from this by launching counterattacks with the UK without a UN mandate. Plays into the Chinese narrative that the United States is acting as a rogue country. It's not acting within the rules of the international system. Again, it shows its unquestioned support for Israel. And so in that respect, there's a thought that if your enemy is shooting themselves in the foot, then you don't want to kind of help stop them from doing that. This is not helping the United States in many respects reputationally. So that's another theory there. But I think my fundamental problem with all of this is that I think that the UK and the US senior leadership are misreading the Chinese and do not have good intelligence about how much influence that they actually have with the Iranians, that they have this idea. And again, it's so interesting how the UK and the Americans think about this. They think that because they are the largest buyer of oil, that everything is transactional and that everything comes down to just a price and money. It's a very Trumpian way of thinking, that everybody's got a price. And it's hard for them to understand that some things are beyond money. And I don't believe that the Iranians are going to listen to the Chinese on these political, security, military issues. That's just not the space that the Iranians have any patience.
Not only listening,
the Chinese.
In my opinion, do we actually think China wants to get involved? So if we see how the situation has been evolving, the Americans and UK are treating China the same way that if we were in their situation, we would have involved. But they're reading the strategic game differently. China doesn't act the same way strategically as the United States. And in this assumption, the United States and the UK and other European powers are treating, let's say, the game. They're speaking to China in their language, and they're expecting that China will reply in their language. But they don't take into assumption that China is speaking another language entirely from the first point. So why would they assume that China will come and help with this, let's say, mediation process, and time again and again, time after time, they've come to the Chinese, and Chinese have been quiet. They haven't said anything. And we might see in a week or two or in a month the same pattern going again. And I don't think that the Chinese will interfere until they believe that they have to.
And let's just put a little footnote on this before we wrap up our discussion today, which is that China-Iran relations economically have actually gone through a little bit of a difficult time over the past few months. People have not noticed, but the Iranians towards the end of last year raised the price of their oil that they sold to the Chinese. And remember that Iranian oil doesn't have a lot of markets to go to because it's under US sanction. But they put a very steep price increase on what they were selling to the Chinese. And Chinese buyers mostly are these what they call teapot refineries. These are these independent refineries up in the northeast of China, up in places like Shandong province. And those buyers said, nope, we're not doing it. So they actually have cut their buys of Iranian oil considerably and have shifted buying cheap Russian oil instead. And so that, too, is an interesting dynamic going on, that the Iranians have grown frustrated with the Chinese enough so that they raised the price. Also, they've been frustrated that there isn't more Chinese investment coming into Iran as part of this 25-year deal that they said they were going to have $400 billion of economic engagement. But a lot of Chinese companies have hesitated from going into Iran because they're worried about being sanctioned by the West. So they may, and again, Huawei, for example, remember when Meng Wanzhou, the daughter of the founder, was arrested by Canadian authorities and held, and that caused that whole stir. A lot of that was over doing business with Iran. And so a lot of Chinese companies are like, nope, we don't want any piece of this. It's too risky right now. So in that respect, the economic relationship may not be even as strong as a lot of people think it is. So certainly the political relationship, I don't think, is that robust. And I want to quote my good friend Jonathan Fulton, who is an Atlantic Council scholar and also a professor in the United Arab Emirates. And he always reminds us when we have him on the show, he always reminds us that in the hierarchy of diplomatic relationships between China and Gulf countries, that Iran is relatively low, that the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Emirates are vastly more important than the Iranians are. That is something that is very difficult for people in Washington, Brussels, and London to grasp, because they are obsessed in many respects with Iran. But at the end of the day, you have to look at where the diplomatic engagement happens, and it happens with the Saudis in particular. And the level of engagement between China and Saudi Arabia now is off the charts. I mean, just off the charts in so many different ways. Let's get you the last word here before we go.
So we just said in the hierarchy of the, let's say, the relations between China and the Middle Eastern countries, Iran is very low, and I assume that Israel is also very low. In compared to the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other Middle Eastern countries. So we have to always, when we think about the relationship in Israel and China, take that into account. Israel is a very small country. It has relations with China, but in compared to the other Middle Eastern, let's say, regional superpowers, it's Middle Eastern regional powers like Saudi Arabia and UAE, its influence is less than those countries. So we should take that into account when we always speak about the relationship between Israel and China, and why we haven't seen more, let's say, mediation and support from China in this area.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good place for us to leave it. We covered a lot of ground. Jony, that's always so much fun to talk with you. Tell the good people where they can find all of the great work that you are doing online. And this is, again, you're running our Arabic site. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find us at the seenalsharqaلاوسط.com, and our Twitter handle Seen Al-Sharq Al-Awsat, and our Facebook page in Arabic. We cover all our Middle Eastern stories in Arabic. We write them and rewrite them in Arabic, and we have a good flow of day-to-day analysis in Arabic on what's going on in between China and the Middle East, and China and Northern Africa, and China and the global South.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And we have a weekly newsletter, so subscribe to our weekly newsletter in Arabic.
And if you want it, you just got to go to the top of the Arabic page, and you've done a nice job circling it here. Just put your email address in there. Just a heads up, this newsletter is 100% in Arabic every week, but it is a fantastic digest of everything that's going on that Jony puts together and really condenses it. So if you are an Arabic speaker and you want to get an Arabic perspective, this is a great way to do it. And it comes out, when does it come out every week?
Comes out on Thursday. So
okay,
Thursday
every
noon.
Thursday, right before the weekend begins on Friday in the Arab world. So
Jony, noon Middle Eastern time.
Yes, thank you so much for all of your help today. It was great to have this conversation with you and to kind of get caught up and to dive into these issues. I know that life is quite difficult for you right now up in northern Israel, so we appreciate you taking the time to join us and to share some of your thoughts and insights, and we're looking forward to talking with you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot. Bye, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.